Good morning and welcome to Worldwide Wisdom. You know, as Jews, we have an interesting custom when it comes to saying the names of people that we don't like. We give a special suffix to certain people. You know, when we say Adolf Hitler, we say Yamach Shemoy. We add an extra appellation, a suffix to his name. May his name be blotted out and erased. That's how we do. That's how we talk. You know, sometimes when we mention someone that we don't approve of, like a particularly vicious enemy of Israel, we mention that suffix, Yamach Shemoy, may his name be blotted out and erased. Now, this is based on a directive which comes from the Talmud in Yuma. It comes from the Gemara. From the Proverbs, the book of Proverbs. Thank you, Mike. It comes from the book of Proverbs, which says as follows in chapter 10, verse 17 of Proverbs: Shem Reshoyim Yirkav, may the name of the wicked decay. That's a verse in the book of Proverbs, and that's why our sages say in the Gemara in Yuma that a person should never name his son after a person who's wicked, because that would be creating a testament, it would be creating a legacy for the evil person. You should never name your child someone like Nimrod or Amalek or some other wicked name of Israel. And that's Haman what Haman, exactly. That's right, Haman. Where was I? I was in South Africa recently, and there's a car company called Haman.
Really?
Yeah, Haman, the Haman car. Yeah, kind of interesting to see Haman on billboards, right? And that's why it's very surprising to us when we look and see that the name of this week's Torah portion is Balak. Balak was a particularly vicious anti-Semite. The Medrash says about Balak that he was more than all other anti-Semites. He hated the Jews even more than the other anti-Semites. I mean, that's a particularly special space to hate the Jews that much, right? He was a king who ruled the nation of Moab in the Saudi Arabian area, or maybe Jordan area. And he was intimidated by the Jews' arrival towards the Promised Land. Remember, the Jews went the long way to the Promised Land. That's what happens when you don't ask for directions, right? So they went through, they started in from the Gaza area, but then they went all the way and they entered through the Golan Heights. I mean, talk about a long roundabout journey, right? So they had to go through the land of Moab, and Moab wasn't happy about this, Moab. So Balak hires the world's most talented prophet, the wicked prophet Bilam, to curse the Jewish people. And this is the story of this week's Torah portion, where Balak hires Bilam, and every time that Bilam tries to curse the Jewish people, his intense curses are transformed into passionate blessings. Right? That's effectively the Torah portion this week. So why would we be naming an entire Torah portion after a wicked anti-Semite? If you're not supposed to name your own child after an anti-Semite, then why would you be naming a Torah portion, giving this guy eternal legacy in Jewish communities all over the world? Can you imagine how many Bar Mitzvah boys talk about the Bar Mitzvah Parsha, Parshas Balak, and they remember the Haftarah of Balak, and they talk about Balak. They're giving him a perpetual name. The name Balak actually means separation. It comes from the word bolka in Isaiah chapter 24. Let me see if I can pick up this original verse. Here it is. Let's see. It's the very first verse of Isaiah chapter 24. Let's see what it says here. Here we go. Hine Hashem bokek haaretz uvolka v'iva faneha v'hefitz yoshveha. Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. Right? So when it says in Hashem bokek haaretz uvolka, behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty and maketh it waste. So the word bolka means waste, which means separation. It means death. This is the meaning of the word Balak. It means death. On the other hand, we know that Balak was a very wise man, wiser than the prophet Bilam. He understood the spiritual evolution of the people of Israel. He understood that the Mashiach was destined to come from the people of Israel. as this is explained in the book of the Shalah, Shnei Luchos Abris, and he even and in fact, he has an extraordinary legacy, because Balak, as much as he hated the Jews, you know what came out of him? Balak had a great granddaughter by the name of Ruth. He had a son by the name of Eglon, and Eglon had a daughter by the name of Orpah, and a daughter called Ruth, right? So this is either grandson or a granddaughter or great granddaughter. I can't remember exactly, but Ruth was a great granddaughter or granddaughter, descendant of Balak. And who did Ruth marry? Ruth eventually married Boaz, leader of Israel. Ruth was a convert. We read about her in Shavuos. She marries Boaz. Their great grandson is Jesse, Yishai, who's the father of David, who becomes the ancestor of Mashiach. So if you look at the story, it's very interesting, the transformation here from the world's darkest anti-Semite to become the redeemer of Israel. Balak indeed has a very interesting evolution. From here we actually see that we discover that Balak represents the power of transformation, where he starts off opposing godliness. He starts off with the word bolka, which means separation and waste. But he ends up being the greatest light of all, the light of redemption, the light of Mashiach, which, by the way, is the major theme of the Torah portion this week. The biblical prophecies that we have, the only biblical prophecies which speak explicitly about the coming of the Mashiach, are from this week's Torah portion. When Balak hires Bilam to curse the Jewish people, and Bilam ends up speaking about the prophecies of the ultimate redemption of the coming of Mashiach. He says, what are the words? A star shall arise from Jacob, and whatever. I mean, all the words are very, very beautiful, very poetic, difficult words, but they are all speaking, many of them are speaking about their future redemption. And how ironic it is that the very anti-Semite that hired Bilam to curse the Jewish people is speaking about the redemption, who's going to be a descendant of the man who hired him. Because Balak represents transformation. See, there's two ways of serving God. There's two kinds of Jews. There's the Jew who's perfect, never sinned, raised in a religious home, went to a Jewish day school, had a nice bar mitzvah. He did everything at the right ages and stages. That's one kind of a Jew. And then you have a Jew that, found himself at the bottom of a jail cell, or maybe in a hallucinatory state in an ashram in India, is steeped in idol worship and tattoos and drug dealings and God knows what else he might have been involved with, where he has an epiphany and he discovers his relationship with God, and now he decides to return to Judaism. Which one is more precious to God?
Second.
One might think that the first one is more precious. One might think, right? Because, this is normal. But we know...
Well, for the first one, it's easy. For the second one, it's a struggle.
Right. And what does God appreciate more?
Struggle.
God actually appreciates more.
Your faith in God.
Right. So the Talmud actually tells us that in the place that the Baal Teshuvah, who's the returnee to Judaism, reaches, even the most perfect Jew, the perfect tzaddik, is not able to reach. Furthermore, the Talmud tells us that when a person does teshuvah, their sins, their deliberate sins, their deliberate sins actually transform into merits. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that their deliberate sins transform into merits? I mean, that's intense. Let me give a very practical example to explain to you how alarming this is. So if you had a marriage, okay, and you have a faithful husband and you have an unfaithful husband, which one do you think is better? Well, let's say a faithful husband and an unfaithful husband who regrets his actions. Which one is better? What do you say?
It's a tough one. You think the faithful husband.
I mean, you think the faithful husband, like seriously. And I think you're right, Michael. I think you're right that the faithful husband is better. Of course, the faithful husband is better. The problem is, the difference is ex post facto. After the fact, when the unfaithful husband has now regretted his ways, right? And now he's already a faithful husband, but after he strayed. Now, what kind of husband is he going to be? Is he going to be a regular husband, like a faithful husband? Or is he going to be with added sensitivity, with added humility? Right? You see what I'm saying? How the negative experiences actually hypersensitized him to be a far more attentive, loving, caring, kind, compassionate spouse than he was if he was just normal.
So according to that, Balak's going to be about teshuvah and all of us.
Right. So I'm still stuck in the metaphor where we can see here that as much as it's counterintuitive, when we stray from the right path, it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing to stray from the right path. But if we already did stray from the right path and we've managed to hobble our way back to where we need to be, then those experiences are actually going to make us far more sensitized, far better versions of ourselves than if we would have been just on a straight path. This is what it means when Isaac, our forefather, Yitzchak, wants to bless his son Esau, and he tells his son Esau to go out and hunt, va'asei mat'amim, and make for me delicacies, so that I may eat, and then I will bless you. It's a little unusual, a little peculiar here, where the Torah needs to tell us what Isaac wanted to eat before the blessing. The Torah doesn't tell us unnecessary pieces of information. The Torah doesn't tell us what people were wearing. They don't tell us the fashions of the time. They don't tell us what what the weather was like. It doesn't really matter, so we don't need to know. So why then do we need to know what Isaac needed to eat, what kind of food he craved before he blessed his son Esau? Chassidus explains that the delicacies, plural, that he was asking his son for were both sweet and savory. He wanted food that was both sweet and savory. Why? Because he was trying to justify what he was about to do. Children don't need to develop a taste for Coca-Cola, right? Because it's sweet. But a child does need to develop a taste for a fine aged wine or an aged cheese, because it's not sweet, it's savory, right? That which is sweet is easy to relate to, but that which is savory is an acquired taste that you can only appreciate after experience and wisdom, right? What Isaac was doing by asking for this menu is that he was justifying why he was blessing or trying to bless Esau over Jacob. He had two sons, one was righteous and one was wicked. Jacob was the sweet, the straightforward path, and Esau was the savory, that was the circuitous path. He was the hunter, he was the wicked one, he was the wilde chaya. Isaac, the father, understood intuitively that ultimately Esau was going to come home. And he said, that's the reason I want to bless them, because I understand the ultimate benefit of the wayward son finding his way back over the one who's actually straightforward. And that's the reason why the Torah tells us about the food, the menu that he requested. Nevertheless, his wife, Rivka, outsmarted him. She got Jacob to prepare the delicacies, and that's a whole prolonged story of here. But she actually got Jacob to prepare the delicacies, because what she was essentially telling her husband, Rivka was telling her husband, was that there might be a benefit to the savory over the sweet, to the wicked over the wise. Nevertheless, whilst he's still in a state of wickedness, this is not something which is capable of receiving the blessing. It will manipulate and abuse the blessing. You cannot be naive to infuse the blessing in the wayward son now until he eventually comes home. And that's why Jacob needs to have dominance over Esau, not the other way around. And yes, and that's why this is what the Torah means when the Torah gives us this jarring naming of a Torah portion this week after this chief anti-Semite by the name of Balak. Because the Balak who the Torah names after this week is not the Balak the wicked. It's the Balak who has been returned. It's the Balak who has been transformed into the ancestor of David, the ancestor of the Mashiach, that Balak who represents the transformation of bad into good until it reaches the ultimate good, right? Which is even greater than straightforward good. Again, the example I like to use is that of the addict versus the healthy person. A healthy person is very nice to have a healthy person. But when you have a person who used to be an addict, he's far more, and now he's healed. He's sober. Now he's far more sensitized to the dangers of what's out there. He's far more careful. He's far more meticulous with other people's feelings. He's far more empathetic. When you've not been through a particular struggle, it's very difficult for you to empathize with other people. But when you have been through that darkness, you have been through that struggle, you're far more likely to be able to relate. Now, the personal message of this naming of the Parsha of Balak for us is a very powerful message for every single Jew. Sometimes a person can look at his own personal status and realize that it's really not anything to write home about. His spiritual state of being is downright depressing. Maybe your background is awful in spiritual terms. Maybe you were just an embarrassment for what for the way a Jew should have lived his life for the first 97% of your life. And now you feel like you're just a stain on the Jewish people. You feel like you're an embarrassment from God, from your Father in heaven. You might want to fall into a state of depression or sadness. Comes the Torah that any darkness can and must be transformed into good, into holiness. God created everything. God didn't put you in a situation that he didn't want. And if God put you into that dysfunctional, difficult, dark situation, it's because he wants you to transform it. How do we know that? Because if Balak, the chief anti-Semite of all, was able to reach the status of being ancestor of the Mashiach, then you too, and by the way, the cause for the greatest blessings of Torah too, Balak, was the one who brought about the greatest blessings of Torah. You know, this week came out a very depressing report from the United Nations, where the chief, one of the main anti-Semites of the United Nations, her name is Francesca Albanese. Have you heard about her? Francesca Albanese is in charge of the Israel file, the special rapporteur for Israel relations. You know, the United Nations has a special desk, has a special department for anti-Semitism. For being anti-Semitic, right? That's what UNRWA is. It's a department which is fully endorsed by Hamas, right? They are in cahoots with them, and you know, UNRWA itself was caught on camera kidnapping and Jews on October 7th and participating willingly in the October 7th attacks. So this Francesca Albanese ran a report this week on how Israel is so cruel, so evil, because just look at the stock market in Israel. Israel has made billions on the stock market since October 7th versus Gaza, which has effectively been erased. Therefore, Israel is evil.
Profiting on the misery of other people.
Right, profiting the misery of other people. I mean, how evil this is. The capitalist white privilege of the Jew how dare he allow his stock market to thrive while Gaza is so innocently suffering for no fault of their own. What did Gaza do to deserve this treatment? I mean, other than October 7th, but you know, that's just a technical detail. So when you read this report, when you watch the report and you watch the other anti-Semites of the world, you know, you have the great democracies of the world like Russia, Iran, Venezuela, North Korea joining her in condemning Israel. And you look at it, you're like, what did we do to deserve this? And you realize that it's actually in today's Torah portion, where one of the blessings that Bilam brings upon the Jewish people is Heinam levadad yishkonu vagoyim lo yitchashav, behold the nation, set apart and not counted amongst the nations. He tells us, listen, guys, you're not going to be given equal status as the other nations. No other nations would be treated this way, right? No other nation. Can you imagine a nation of Ukraine being invaded by Russia and then condemning Ukraine for defending itself from the attack, right? Because, I don't know, because how dare you, right? This is not a treatment that would be given to any other nation. What the Torah is telling us is don't feel bad that you are being treated to a different standard. There's a double standard. And what the promise of Torah is, the blessing is that God is your direct source of blessing. You don't need to lean on anybody else for your validation. Right? So Balak is actually the source of the most beautiful, extraordinary blessings in Torah. He is the power of transformation. So we're inspired by Balak to realize that if someone is evil and dark and dysfunctional and unholy as Balak is able to turn himself around, then how much more so my little life as well. I'm not as dark and evil as Balak, for sure. And I too am able to turn my life around. And therefore, when you see another, that certainly when it applies to yourself, but also when it applies to a fellow Jew as well. You see a fellow Jew and you say, "Oh, that's a bad Jew. That's not a worthy Jew. I have no interest, no use for such a Jew." That's right, exactly the point. That's exactly the point. What we're supposed to realize is that we're supposed to look at every single Jew for the good within them, to realize that the darkness within them is just a temporary state of insanity, which needs to be suspended and reversed, so that we can transform the darkness into light, the dysfunction into function, the anarchy and the chaos into order, in order that we can shine the greatest light that we're supposed to shine upon this world, which is the coming of Mashiach. Mashiach is born from the transformation of the darkness of this world, and that is the meaning of the Torah portion being named after the anti-Semite, to inspire us all on our own journeys as well, to realize that hope is not lost. If he can do it, then we can do it. We too can make the rest of our life the best of our life. It starts with us today. Any questions? Good. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
the